The knock on my door wasn't just a knock, it was that cheap, hollow tap of someone trying to sound official but failing miserably. Behind it was the stench of expensive perfume. The kind that doesn't fade when the wind blows, it fights the air like poison. And there she stood, a woman with a plastic smile, clipboard in hand, claiming I owed her $3,200 in HOA fees for a neighborhood I had never even agreed to join. My name is Marcus Kellerman. I'm a widowed mechanic, a man who prefers the company of engines over people these days. I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble, but trouble came marching up my gravel driveway that Tuesday morning, wearing designer sneakers and a face full of fake authority. She introduced herself as Delilah Hutchcraft, the president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, or as I'd come to know it, the self-appointed queen of the cookie-cutter kingdom built around my land. She was 47. Suburban royalty with a spray-tan, diamond-studded fitness watch and a white Escalade parked half on my grass. The way she sniffed the country air was like it offended her. "Mr. Kellerman," she said, with that clipped tone bureaucrats use when they think the world owes them something. "We need to discuss your property compliance issues. You owe the association $3,200 in back dues." I set my wrench down on the hood of the Chevy I'd been rebuilding, wiped the grease from my hands, and stared at her. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong man. I'm not part of any HOA." Her smile sharpened. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that hides teeth, actually. When the county rezoned this area for residential development, all properties were automatically included in our association. It's mandatory. I pulled out my deed, the one I'd studied a dozen times since inheriting this place. "This land's been in my family since 1945. I never signed anything tying me to your subdivision." She flipped a page on her clipboard like a judge slamming a gavel. "The rezoning supersedes individual property rights. That unkempt lawn, your commercial vehicle," she gestured at my work truck, "and that unapproved structure," she said, pointing at my grandmother's old barn, "are all violations of community standards." I kept my voice calm. "Look, I'll tidy the place up if it's bothering the neighbors, but I'm not paying for services I don't use. I don't need your landscapers, your pool maintenance, your mailers, none of it." Her eyes narrowed into two cold slits. "We'll see about that." Then she handed me a cream-colored notice printed with legalese. 30 days to comply, or we'll place a lien on your property. "I have connections in local government, Mr. Kellerman," she added, leaning in as if her perfume could overpower my will. "This can go easy or hard." She turned and left with that practiced pivot only people who thrive on intimidation can pull off. That night, I spread my grandmother Rose's old paperwork across my kitchen table. Property surveys, tax records, utility easements. The farmhouse smelled faintly of motor oil and the pine cleaner I used on the counters, a smell that still comforted me 2 years after losing my wife, Sarah, to cancer. I came to this place to heal. I didn't come to fight, but tucked in between those papers was something curious, a boundary survey that didn't match the HOA's plat map. In fact, according to the county's own records, my property line ran further south than I realized. That was the first crack in their story. And here's something every homeowner should know. Property boundary surveys trump subdivision plats when there's a legal conflict. Always demand a survey before you believe in HOA's jurisdiction claims. I thought that would be enough to shut her down. I was wrong, because Delilah Hutchcraft wasn't just a meddling neighbor, she was desperate, and desperation breeds recklessness. 2 days later, I was elbow-deep in my neighbor's pickup engine when I heard them, two unfamiliar voices drifting across my driveway, full of that fake authority tone that makes your stomach drop. Two men stood by my mailbox, clipboards in hand, badges dangling from lawn yards that looked like they'd come from a Halloween costume aisle. The taller one had the body of a mall cop gone to seed, his polo shirt stretched tight over a gut that said desk job, not enforcement. The other was a jittery, pen-clicking twig of a man whose eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "Marcus Kellerman," gut guy announced, "County Code Enforcement. We're here about multiple violations on this property." I set my tools down slowly, wiped my hands, and studied their badges. My late wife used to work for the county assessor's office. I knew what real government IDs looked like. These weren't them, not even close. "Can I see some official identification?" I asked. They exchanged a quick, panicked glance. The skinny one cleared his throat. You're in violation for operating commercial vehicles in a residential zone, unpermitted structures, and noise violations during restricted hours. The paperwork they handed me looked professional, I'll give them that. But real county inspectors don't show up without notice. And they definitely don't drive off in a white pickup with no government markings. What department are you with exactly? I pressed, Environmental and Zoning Enforcement. The skinny one mumbled, his voice cracking like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. I memorized their license plate before they practically peeled out of my driveway. Diesel exhaust hanging in the crisp morning air. 20 minutes later, I had the county clerk on the phone. Hi, I just received citations from your environmental and zoning enforcement officers. Can you walk me through the appeal process, sir? The clerk said. Slowly, we don't have an environmental and zoning enforcement department. Who exactly gave you these citations? And there it was, Delilah had officially crossed the line from petty HOA tyranny into felony territory. Impersonating government officials carries 3 to 5 years in prison in this state. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a crime. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Deputy Martinez at the sheriff's office, laying out photos of the fake badges and that white pickup's license plate. Let me run these plates, he said, typing into his computer. He raised an eyebrow. Well, that's interesting. Vehicles registered to Willowbrook Property Management LLC. Same address as the whole office. I asked. Double quotes bingo. Double quotes. He leaned back. Mr. Kellerman, this is more serious than the usual neighbor squabble. I'd recommend getting security cameras. People desperate enough to impersonate officers, they tend to escalate. I took his advice. The next morning, I installed a 4-camera system, driveway, workshop, front porch, back gate, cloud storage, motion alerts, the whole setup. If anyone came back with another fake badge, they'd be immortalized in 1080p. Meanwhile, Delilah launched her smear campaign. My phone buzzed with next-door notifications. Emergency HOA meeting to discuss problematic property owner behavior. Protecting our investments from declining property values. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor, shuffled over that evening with a plate of snickerdoodles and a whisper of neighborhood gossip. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled my kitchen, just like my grandmother's used to when this land was still surrounded by fields, not prefab fences. Marcus, honey, she said, lowering her voice. That woman's got some of the newer folks riled up. She's telling them you're turning this place into a junkyard. I thanked her, and I made a decision. If Delilah wanted a public fight, she'd get one. The next evening, I walked into their HOA meeting uninvited, carrying my grandmother's original deed, 1940s photographs of the farm, and a manila folder thick with evidence. The community center was packed, 40-odd residents crammed shoulder to shoulder, the air heavy with the artificial scent of citrus cleaner. Excuse me, I said, keeping my voice calm, neighborly. I'd like to clear up some misinformation about my property. Delilah's head snapped around. Her face went from smug to furious into seconds flat. This is a private meeting for HOA members only. You're trespassing, actually, I said, holding up the photos. This is a public community center, and I think folks might be interested in seeing what this area looked like before Willowbrook existed. The black and white photo showed my grandmother's farm stretching across rolling green hills. The old stone house standing proud among oak trees and vegetable gardens. A few residents leaned forward, curiosity softening their suspicion. My family has maintained this land for 80 years. I continued, I've got no problem keeping it tidy, but I never signed any agreement to join your association. The room buzzed with whispers. I could see the doubt spreading like a crack in glass. Maybe the scary mechanic wasn't so scary after all. But Delilah wasn't about to lose face. Security, she shrieked, though there wasn't a guard within 10 miles. Remove this man for harassment. A few uncomfortable-looking residents shuffled toward me, more apologetic than threatening. I handed them copies of the photos as I walked out. Anyone who wants to talk neighbor to neighbor, you know where to find me. That night, she filed a harassment complaint with the real police, claiming I disrupted their meeting and made threats. When Officer Johnson came by, his tired expression told me everything. Mr. Kellerman, he said, we've had multiple complaints about HOA overreach here. Just keep documenting everything. And if I were you, avoid direct confrontation. Let them dig their own hole. As his taillights disappeared down my gravel driveway, I realized something. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute anymore, this was war. And Delilah Hutchcraft had no idea I was about to pull the foundation out from under her entire corrupt little empire. When Officer Martinez left that night, his parting words echoed in my mind, "Might want to take a closer look at your property." Boundaries. The moment my door shut, I turned on the kitchen light, the amber glow bouncing off old wood paneling and the stack of papers I'd spread out days earlier. The house was quiet. That kind of rural quiet where you hear the clock ticking and the hum of the refrigerator like a heartbeat. I unrolled my property survey again, smoothing its creases with both hands. Every line, every measurement, every number suddenly felt heavier than it had a week ago. And there it was, the whole office, according to their maps. It sat comfortably on Willowbrook's common property. But when I compared it to my grandmother's old deed, the edge of their office kissed what looked suspiciously like my property line. The paper rustled as I flipped between survey maps and county records, cross-referencing the plats like a detective piecing together a cold case. And slowly, a much bigger picture started coming into focus. One that smelled less like community beautification and more like theft, fraud, and desperation. 3 days after my uninvited appearance at the HOA meeting, a certified letter arrived. Thick envelope, expensive paper, law firm letterhead so ostentatious it practically screamed, "We charge $400 an hour and want you to feel it." Inside was a cease and desist order. A masterpiece of legal intimidation. "You are hereby ordered to immediately cease all interference with lawful HOA operations, trespassing on community property, and causing property damage through negligent tree maintenance." I almost laughed out loud. Tree maintenance. Apparently, my century-old oak trees had the audacity to drop their leaves on their precious sidewalk before I did anything rash. I called my insurance agent, Jim, an old friend of my late wife. Someone who never sugarcoated the truth. "Jim, hypothetically," I asked, "if someone claimed my trees were damaging their property, what would you need to see?" He snorted. "Evidence of actual damage, not just normal leaf drop. Marcus, trees don't become liable for being trees, but document everything. Take photos, keep records." Sounds like someone's fishing for a settlement. His advice stuck with me. Losing Sarah had taught me not to waste time on fear, but it also taught me to stop letting people walk all over me. Bullies thrive when no one pushes back. So I hired Peterson Land Surveying. $200 felt steep for a guy trying to rebuild a life one engine job at a time. But my grandmother used to say, "Buy truth, even if it costs you." While I waited for the survey results, I found a lawyer, David Blackwood. The kind of man HOA presidents whispered about when they thought no one could hear. 30 years of defending property owners from bureaucratic overreach. His office walls were lined with framed verdicts, a graveyard of defeated HOA board members. During our consultation, he leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and said, "Marcus, the fact that they sent fake government officials tells me one thing: they're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Mistakes create evidence." That sentence became my mantra. The survey crew arrived on a foggy Tuesday morning, their tripods and laser equipment chirping like electronic birds as they mapped my land. I brought them coffee, stood on the damp gravel of my driveway, and tried not to let my imagination run wild. Around noon, the lead surveyor, a young guy with a steady voice, called me over. "Mr. Kellerman, you might want to see this." I stepped over, boots crunching frostbitten grass. "Your property line," he said, pointing to the tablet screen, "extends about 30 feet further south than your old survey indicates." GPS technology's a lot more precise now than it was. In the 90s, those older surveys, they sometimes missed by a good margin. My heart started pounding. 30 feet. That includes, he nodded. That includes about half of that building over there. The whole office, according to the county's original land grants. That's sitting on your land. I didn't say a word, just stood there, staring across the field at the smug little brick building that had been the nerve center of all my headaches. For months, they'd been threatening me with fines, liens, and lawsuits from an office illegally planted on my soil. That evening, I pulled my grandmother's deed again, laid it next to the new survey, and the truth snapped into place like a trap. Delilah hadn't just overreached. She'd built her power base on stolen ground. But she wasn't done. The very next morning, her Escalade rolled into my driveway like a conquering army. The crunch of her high heels on gravel was my warning shot. Before her voice followed, "This driveway easement is HOA common area," she announced, clipboard at the ready. "You're required to share access with community vehicles." I sipped my coffee and didn't bother hiding my amusement. "Ma'am, this has been my family's private driveway since 1945. You need to move your car." "I don't think so." She pulled out her phone and started snapping pictures of my barn, my workshop, even my doghouse. "I'm documenting continued violations for our attorney." 20 minutes later, she was back, this time with a landscaping crew. Without a word to me, they started dismantling my mailbox. Wrenches, shovels, the whole show. "This structure violates community aesthetic standards," she declared. "The HOA will install a compliant replacement." I called the post office immediately. "Someone just removed my mailbox claiming HOA authority." "Can they do that?" "Absolutely not," the supervisor said, his voice sharp as a whipmail. "Delivery obstruction is a federal offense. File a complaint immediately and reinstall your mailbox wherever you want, on your property." That afternoon, I drove to Home Depot and bought the biggest, most beautiful mailbox they had. Solid, cast iron, jet black, with Kellerman 1945 engraved in brass on the side. If she wanted a mailbox war, she just picked a mechanic who knew how to weld his name in steel. While I was bolting it down, my attorney called Marcus. "I've been reviewing their incorporation papers," Blackwood said. "Here's the thing. HOAs can't enforce rules on non-members, period. But if that office is on your land, they've been trespassing for years." "How much is that worth?" I asked. "Commercial lease rates, back rent, unauthorized improvements. Conservatively, $50,000 to $70,000, maybe more." That night, Delilah filed another police report, claiming I threatened her during the mailbox incident. When Deputy Martinez showed up again, same guy who handled the fake cop fiasco, he looked annoyed. "Mr. Kellerman, she says you told her you'd make her regret messing with your property, did you?" I told her removing my mailbox was illegal and she'd regret not checking federal postal regulations first. He closed his notebook with a snap. "Thought so. Between you and me, we've had 6 complaints about this HOA this month. Document everything. Avoid face-to-face when possible. Let the system handle it." As he was leaving, he paused. "Your survey's already making noise at the county office. Planning department's asking questions about that building's permits." That was the moment my pulse quickened. I was no longer defending myself. I was holding a loaded weapon, proof that the Queen's castle was built on sand. I spent that night under the harsh glow of my workshop lights, the air thick with motor oil and sawdust, studying those survey lines like they were treasure maps. I didn't yet know how deep her desperation ran. The shell companies, the inflated contracts, the missing funds, all that rot was still hiding under layers of fake smiles and neighborhood newsletters. But I knew one thing: tomorrow I'd start using this evidence like a sledgehammer. The vandalism started exactly 1 week later. I woke up to find all 4 tires on my work truck slashed. Clean cuts, precise, someone took their time. Spray paint streaked across my garage door, and the smell of chemicals still hung in the cold dawn air. What they didn't know was that I'm not just a mechanic. I'm a man who plans for bad people to do bad things. I had 4 visible cameras. They covered the obvious spots, but I also had 2 hidden ones. One tucked in the old oak tree, the other behind the barn. They spray painted the visible lenses. Rookie moves. At 2:47 a.m., my hidden camera caught everything. Delilah Hutchcraft herself, scarf wrapped around her neck, whispering orders to 2 men in dark hoodies as they slashed my tires and vandalized my equipment. I uploaded the footage, called my insurance company. "Jim," I said, "remember that hypothetical damage we talked about? It just got real." The adjuster they sent, a sharp guy named Rodriguez, shook his head as he inspected the damage. "Mr. Kellerman, this is the 7th vandalism claim in this area in 6 months. All the victims." HOA disputes, insurance fraud investigators are starting to take notice. "You think it's organized? I think someone's running a harassment campaign and hoping payouts make people move quietly. Keep that footage safe. We may need it for more than your claim." While I waited for the tow truck, my phone buzzed again. Another next-door blast. Emergency neighborhood safety meeting. Dangerous individual threatens community safety. Commercial activities violate zoning laws. Property values at risk. Mrs. Patterson showed up that evening, Same plate of oatmeal raisin cookies, but this time her hands trembled. Marcus. She held another meeting, she whispered, she's telling folks you're running an illegal auto shop, says you're planning a commercial expansion. I sighed. Did she show them anything real, honey? She said, shaking her head. Since when do bullies need evidence? She had charts about property values. Pictures of your truck made it sound like you're single-handedly destroying the American dream. I thanked her, then grabbed my tape measure and flashlight. Something about that office building had been nagging me. A puzzle piece I hadn't turned over yet. So after dark, I drove over. The building was quiet, lights off, empty. I measured, checked the stakes from the new survey, and there it was. The line didn't just cut through their building. It ran right under their main office wall. Worse, the county records I pulled later that night showed no proper building permits, and the property tax records were a tangle of inconsistencies. Someone had been either very sloppy or very confident no one would ever look. My research session was interrupted by a phone call. Mr. Kellerman, this is Detective Williams with the County Fraud Unit. We understand you've had issues with fake law enforcement officers. That's right. Filed a report with Deputy Martinez. We'd like to talk tomorrow, 10 a.m. I agreed, not knowing that meeting would open an entirely new chapter of this war. The next morning, the harassment escalated. My power was shut off. Middle of summer heat. Workshop full of jobs. And suddenly I was in the dark. The utility company claimed I had 3 months of unpaid bills, despite my bank showing automatic payments processed every month. Sir, the supervisor told me, we received complaint calls about illegal electrical connections, safety violations. Someone requested an immediate disconnect. I pulled up my bank app, scrolled through receipts. I can prove every payment. Someone's filing false complaints. It took 4 hours and 3 different supervisors to restore power, but the pattern was clear now. Delilah wasn't just chasing a $3,200 check. She was trying to break me, financially, mentally, piece by piece. That afternoon, I sat across from Detective Williams. He slid a file across the table, thicker than a phone book, full of printed emails, photos, and invoices. Mr. Kellerman, he said, your HOA isn't just overstepping, they're under investigation. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a man under siege. I felt like a man holding the fuse to a bomb that was about to go off, and the whole neighborhood would hear it. The complaint I filed turned out to be more than just a neighborhood dispute. It opened a door to something much bigger. Detective Williams met me in his office, his expression serious. Marcus, you've stumbled into a pattern we've been tracking for months, he said. Willowbrook Property Management is under investigation for organized insurance fraud, and your evidence fits their playbook. I felt my stomach tighten. What kind of pattern? I asked. They run harassment campaigns to force property owners out. Once people give up or sell cheap, they file fake insurance claims for damage they cause themselves. Your hidden camera footage shows the same faces we've seen in 5 other neighborhoods. The detective laid out photographs from different properties. Each had suffered the same fate: vandalism, fake utility shutoffs, bogus inspections, and constant pressure to either join expensive HOA letters or sell their homes below market value. The good news, you're not alone, he said. The bad news, this is organized crime disguised as community governance. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed. Jake Morrison, the HOA treasurer, wanted to meet somewhere away from prying eyes. We chose a diner off Highway 9. He arrived looking pale, his eyes darting toward every window. Marcus, he whispered, I've been treasurer for 2 years. I started noticing numbers that didn't make sense. $50,000 for landscaping that never happened. $30,000 for legal consultations that led nowhere. Jake slid a manila envelope across the table. I made copies before Delilah could stop me. She's been stealing from every family here, almost $200,000 over 3 years. Inside were bank statements, shell company payments, and cash withdrawals. That all traced back to Delilah's personal accounts. Why show me this? I asked. Because I have kids in this neighborhood. I moved here to escape corruption, not enable it. And there's more. Where she holds those HOA meetings. The office building is on my land. I checked the property records. Every meeting, every contract signed there, it's all legally questionable. I left that diner knowing this wasn't just about my grandmother's land anymore. It was the centerpiece of an empire built on theft, fraud, and intimidation. That evening, my attorney, David Blackwood spread the documents across my kitchen table. Marcus, this is bigger than we thought, he said. We're looking at nearly $180,000 in fraudulent expenditures, fake legal fees, inflated contracts, payments to family-owned shell companies. The real shock came when we traced the ownership of the HOA office building. She built that office on your property, David said, then charges the HOA $4,200 a month in rent money taken from homeowners' fees. And worse, she avoided thousands in property taxes each year by leaving that parcel under my name. I stared out the window at the building that represented her power. If I can prove ownership of that land, what happens to all their contracts? They become legally questionable, David replied. And if we calculate 3 years of commercial lease rates plus damages, you're talking substantial restitution. The next day, I met with County Auditor Patricia Polson. She laid out maps and tax records across a massive table. Mr. Kellerman, she said, you've been paying taxes on the entire 3.2 acres including the parcel where the HOA office sits. There's no legal subdivision. According to our records, you own that land. Ms. Hutchcraft has been collecting rent for property she doesn't legally control, land, avoiding $8,000 a year in taxes. She paused, then added, we've found 3 other properties in this area with similar irregularities, all tied to Willowbrook Property Management. Driving home, I knew I'd reached a crossroads. I could settle quietly, reclaim my land, and let her slink away, or I could expose everything and help 200 families get their stolen money back. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes doing right costs more than doing nothing, but sleeping peacefully is worth every penny. That night, I called David. I'm in, I said, not just for my property, for all of it. Over the next 3 days, my workshop became a war room. Maps, financial records, and legal documents covered every surface. Mrs. Patterson brought decades-old land deeds, confirming my grandmother's ownership. Jake provided more bank statements showing how Delilah funneled money through fake vendors tied to her family. Sarah Polson, an investigative reporter, joined the effort, her eyes lit with the hunger of a journalist about to uncover a major scandal. David outlined our first move. We'll file a quiet title action. It forces anyone claiming interest in your land to prove their legal right within 30 days or lose their claim forever. She has no real claim. This will trap her. Meanwhile, Sarah uncovered a network of shell companies under Delilah's maiden name. Her husband's business. Even her son. Mrs. Patterson shook her head, pointing to the whole office through my kitchen window. That's sitting right on your grandmother's old vegetable garden, she said. She grew the best tomatoes there, Marcus. That woman has stolen enough. By the end of the week, we had evidence packets ready, fraudulent expenditures, fake vendors, embezzled funds documented down to the cent. Detective Williams texted me, county auditor on board. Meeting tomorrow, be ready. Delilah won't go quietly. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, staring at the glow of my kitchen lights. This was no longer just a property dispute. It was a war between justice and corruption, and I had just become the deciding factor. Delilah, sensing her empire cracking, was about to make her most desperate move yet. Delilah's scheme was starting to unravel. For years, she had been funneling settlement money, about $45,000 over 2 years, from supposed repairs straight into her pocket without fixing anything. Insurance fraud is a federal crime, David reminded me. If we can prove she staged the vandalism to create these claims, she could be facing serious prison time. Sarah was already laying the groundwork for a media blitz. Our plan was meticulous, like a military operation. Legal filings would trigger a 30-day countdown, and the upcoming HOA meeting, just 2 weeks away, would be our public battleground. Sarah would be there as press. Detective Williams would observe from the crowd, and I would present the evidence, but I knew Delilah wouldn't go quietly. Desperate people do dangerous things, I warned the team. We had briefed the sheriff's department to document any threats or intimidation instantly. David brought in Rebecca Torres, a forensic accountant with a history of exposing HOA scams. Marcus, I've seen this play before. Shell companies, fake vendors, inflated contracts. They all follow the same script, she said. The damages? At least $200,000 in stolen fees, plus commercial lease losses from the illegal use of my property. Jake Morrison's bravery was becoming the backbone of our case. My kids live here, he said firmly. I won't let them grow up thinking corruption is normal. The morning after our strategy session, I received a certified letter from Henderson and Associates Legal Services. It demanded I cease my harassment and threatened a $500,000 lawsuit. But when I looked up their address, it was just a mailbox store in the next county. David chuckled when I showed him Marcus. This is desperation in letter form, fake firm, fake threats. She's panicking. At 3 a.m. the next night, my cameras caught Delilah and two masked accomplices sneaking onto my property with landscaping tools. They buried bags of chemicals near my workshop, hoping to frame me for environmental violations. By dawn, we had dug them up, and Detective Williams confirmed this was a professional frame job. Good thing you've got security footage. Her desperation peaked on Thursday. I came home to find her standing in my living room, having broken in through a window. We need to talk, she said, waving a $50,000 check. This covers everything, just sign a non-disclosure and drop the case, she pleaded, her perfume barely masking the sweat of fear. I recorded the conversation. So, you're admitting there's a property boundary issue? I asked. Her forehead cracked. Those were legitimate administrative expenses. She snapped when I mentioned the stolen funds. I refused her bribe and called my attorney, Marcus. This is a smoking gun, David said. Attempted bribery. Admission of property manipulation. This is the evidence prosecutors dream about. That weekend, she escalated further. A sheriff delivered me a temporary restraining order based on false claims that I had threatened her. Between you and me, the judge didn't buy it. The deputy whispered. Jake, meanwhile, was being blackmailed over an unpermitted deck addition, one that could cost him $15,000 to fix. Jake, we'll sort your permits later. Don't let her silence you. Then came the bombshell. She called an emergency HOA board meeting to dissolve the entire association, thinking if the HOA didn't exist, her crimes would disappear with it. But Jake was ahead of her. I already delivered the financial records to the district attorney. He told me and Marcus I found correspondence with 3 other counties. She's expanding this scam. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the whole office lights flicker, knowing this was the last calm before the storm. Sarah texted, article ready. TV News wants live coverage Monday. This had started as a simple property dispute. Now it was a regional criminal conspiracy. And in 3 days, justice would either be served or Delilah would escape to exploit other communities. But there was no escaping now. Too much evidence. Too many witnesses, too many people ready to fight back. The only question left, would she surrender or go down swinging like a cornered animal? I played the security footage for the deputy on my laptop, showing him Thursday's break-in and bribery attempt. Deputy, she entered my house without permission. I have the whole thing recorded. His professional mask slipped into genuine concern. Sir, I'm going to need copies of this footage for my report. What you're showing me contradicts her statement entirely. By Monday morning, Delilah's restraining order had backfired spectacularly. Judge Patricia Morrison, after reviewing the footage in an emergency hearing, dismissed her petition and sanctioned her for filing false documents. Miss Hutchcraft, the judge said sharply, attempting to misuse the restraining order process to silence someone with legitimate property claims is a serious abuse of court resources. You will pay Mr. Kellerman's attorney fees for this frivolous filing. But Delilah was far from finished. That afternoon, a county business licensing officer arrived at my workshop, claiming I was running an unlicensed automotive facility in violation of zoning laws. This inspector was legitimate unlike her earlier fakes, but when I showed him my license and explained I only help neighbors with their cars as a favor, he frowned. Mr. Kellerman, someone filed a complaint saying you're operating a full-scale auto repair shop, but this looks like a clean, basic workshop. The complaint seems exaggerated. He left without issuing a citation. I immediately called Detective Williams. She's trying everything to shut me down before Monday's meeting, I said. Marcus, that's actually good news, Williams replied. Desperate criminals make mistakes, and filing false reports to government agencies can lead to harassment charges. Keep documenting everything. By Sunday, her smear campaign turned ridiculous. Anonymous flyers appeared on every doorstep with a headline screaming, "Dangerous individual threatens community safety." Under it was a grainy photo of me under the hood of my truck, with fabricated quotes about declining property values and safety risks. Mrs. Patterson called an hour later. Marcus, honey, this is backfiring on her worse than she realizes. 3 neighbors already stopped by to ask if you're okay and if they can help. People aren't as stupid as she thinks. Jake Morrison also reported that several homeowners started questioning HOA finances after seeing the flyers, but Sunday night brought her most dangerous move yet. I woke to breaking glass and the acrid smell of smoke Molotov cocktails hurled through my workshop. Windows, the volunteer fire department, responded quickly, but thousands of dollars worth of tools were lost. Most alarming, the arsonist targeted my evidence storage. My fireproof safe was damaged, but the contents survived. This is attempted destruction of evidence, Detective Williams said as firefighters cleared the scene. Arson with intent to obstruct justice carries a mandatory minimum sentence. She just upgraded herself from fraud to a violent felony. Security cameras caught everything, to dark-clothed figures. One with a limp I recognized from the tire slashing. Footage will have arrests by morning, Williams promised, but Marcus, I'm worried about tomorrow. Someone willing to commit arson might escalate to violence. Her concern was prophetic. By morning, my answering machine held 3 anonymous threats. Drop this or you'll regret it. Your wife died easy, you won't be so lucky. Back off or join her. The mention of Sarah's death made my blood boil, but it also gave us new evidence. Voice recognition software matched the threats to previous recordings of Delilah. By noon, the media storm had reached a breaking point. Sarah Paulson's preliminary article went viral, with property rights groups, legal reform advocates, and even federal investigators taking notice. News trucks began arriving for the evening's HOA meeting. Marcus, you've become the face of a national movement, Sarah told me, finalizing her piece. The community center parking lot filled hours early. Homeowners from nearby neighborhoods arrived, eager to witness what many were calling a David vs. Goliath showdown. Then, at 4 p.m., Delilah made her last desperate play. Her attorney called with a settlement offer fit for a Vegas high roller, full transfer of the office building to me, $100,000 cash. Public apology, resignation from all HOA positions, relocation out of state within 60 days. She's offering to vanish completely. David, my attorney, said, no criminal charges, no prosecution, no media mess. You get your land back. And the $200,000 stolen from homeowners, I asked. She'll set up a restitution fund. But there's no guarantee of full repayment. This time, the choice was easy, David. Those families deserve real justice, not hush money. We're going public tonight. As evening came, I realized her desperation had only strengthened my case. Every false report, every threat, every smear added weight to the evidence. By 6:30 p.m., over 300 people packed the community center built for 150, with speakers broadcasting outside to hundreds more. Cameras rolled, reporters prepared their questions, and Sarah live-streamed 2000s. Delilah entered at 7 p.m., flanked by her remaining loyalists. She wore an expensive navy suit, but the confidence was gone, replaced by thinly veiled panic. This meeting will address routine HOA business only, she snapped. Jake Morrison stood, holding his ledger. Point of order, Madam President. State law requires homeowner concerns be addressed in public meetings regardless of membership status. Mr. Morrison, you are out of order, she barked. Actually, Miss Hutchcraft, you are, came a voice from the back. County Commissioner Williams stepped forward. She flushed red but had no choice. Fine, limited public comment, but I reserve the right to maintain order. I rose, survey in hand, feeling every eye turn toward me. Neighbors, my name is Marcus Kellerman. Some of you know me as the mechanic causing trouble about HOA fees. Tonight I want to show you what that trouble really is. I unfolded the survey. This official county survey, conducted 3 weeks ago, proves the HOA office building sits on land my family has owned since 1945. The room erupted. Delilah shot up. That's a fabricated document meant to disrupt legitimate governance. Ma'am, I said calmly, this survey is certified by the county auditor's office. And that's only the beginning. Jake began distributing financial records, payments to shell companies, inflated contracts, mysterious cash withdrawals, $180,000 gone. Gasps turned to angry muttering. This is slander, Delilah shrieked. I've dedicated my life to this community. I won't stand here attacked by a bitter widower with delusions of grandeur. That was her fatal mistake. Mrs. Patterson stood, her voice like a whip. Delilah Hutchcraft, you should be ashamed. That man lost his wife to cancer and came here seeking peace instead. You terrorized him, stole from your neighbors, and turned this community into your personal piggy bank. Applause thundered. Even some of her former allies clapped. Marcus stood firm, his voice cutting through the tense room. This property, every inch of it, belongs to me, Marcus Kellerman, and for 3 years. You've been trespassing while stealing money from hardworking families. Gasps rippled across the community center, but Marcus wasn't done. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the speaker button. Neighbors, he said. Holding the phone up, I want you to hear something. Recorded in my living room last Thursday. A familiar voice spilled into the hushed hall. Delilah's. $50,000 to make this disappear. Marcus, think about what that money could mean for your business, your future. Then came Marcus's recorded voice. So you're acknowledging there's a property boundary issue with the whole office building. Delilah's damning reply followed. The building situation can be adjusted, relocated if necessary. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward Delilah, who stood frozen, her face ashen. The implication was clear. The HOA president had just admitted, in her own voice, that the office building was illegally placed, and she had tried to bribe Marcus to keep it quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus declared, voice steady, that's the voice of your HOA president attempting to bribe a crime victim to conceal evidence of fraud and theft. From the back of the room, Detective Martinez stepped forward. His badge now gleaming on his belt. Delilah Hutchcraft, he said firmly. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Gasps erupted as metallic handcuffs clicked shut around Delilah's wrists. 3 years of corruption had finally caught up with the woman who had terrorized their neighborhood. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, Martinez recited as he led her away. Delilah suddenly broke down, her composure shattering. You don't understand, she screamed at the crowd. Property management is complicated. I deserved compensation for my time. These people don't appreciate everything I've done for them. But no one stepped forward to defend her. Commissioner Williams rose from his chair and faced the packed room. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you've witnessed why transparency and proper governance matter. The county will launch a full investigation into HOA practices across our jurisdiction, and reforms will be implemented to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. The applause that followed was thunderous. Sarah's live stream counter ticked past 15,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from HOA abuse victims all over the country. Many saying they finally felt hope because of what this small town had accomplished. Jake Morrison, now interim treasurer, stepped up to the microphone, his voice trembling with emotion. As interim treasurer, I motion to dissolve the current HOA structure and form a legitimate homeowners association, one with full financial transparency and democratic governance. Seconded, voices shouted from the crowd. All in favor, Jake asked. Nearly every hand shot up. As people began filing out of the community center, dozens stopped to shake Marcus's hand, apologize for doubting him, or share their own stories about Delilah's abuse of power. The air, once heavy with fear and division, now buzzed with relief, plans, and cautious laughter. Neighbors who had avoided each other for years were finally starting to heal. Mrs. Patterson walked beside Marcus toward the parking lot, her frail hand squeezing his arm. Marcus, your grandmother would be so proud. You didn't just save your own property, you saved this entire neighborhood. Marcus glanced back at the whole office building, the epicenter of so much chaos, and realized the true victory wasn't in reclaiming his land or watching Delilah be arrested. It was in seeing a community rediscover its strength, that ordinary people, with courage and evidence, could defeat even the deepest corruption. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, insurance claims, and the long, slow work of recovering stolen money. But tonight, justice had won, publicly, completely, and with the whole world watching. 6 months later, Marcus woke to a sound he hadn't heard in years, the laughter of children drifting through his window. Kids were playing soccer in what used to be Delilah's meticulously manicured common area. The property lines that had once felt like battle zones now echoed with joy. The neighborhood had transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined. His workshop, once a lonely refuge for a grieving widower, had become an unofficial community college. 3 nights a week, He taught automotive basics to teenagers whose parents had once avoided him but now trusted him with their kids' futures. The air smelled of motor oil and new beginnings as young hands learned trades that could one day support their families. Delilah's reckoning had been swift and brutal. 18 months in federal prison to $147. 0 in restitution order, permanent banishment from property management. Their ex-husband fled to Arizona and changed his name. Her children transferred schools to escape the infamy of having America's most notorious HOA criminal as their mother. And the office building, the very one that had started this war, had been repurposed for good. Marcus, instead of tearing it down, donated it to the Reformed Neighborhood Association. Now its ground floor buzzed with activity, free legal clinics, computer classes for seniors once intimidated by Delilah's fake complexity, and budget meetings, where every dollar was displayed in plain English. Upstairs, Mrs. Patterson, now 79 and sharper than ever, curated a small historical exhibit, the story of how one neighborhood went from corruption to cooperation. School groups toured regularly, learning how ordinary citizens could defeat entrenched authority through documentation, courage, and unity. Her favorite display featured Delilah's mugshot beside a quote, "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." Financially, the recovery was extraordinary. Under the new cooperative model, homeowners saved 43% on legitimate services, while improving quality. Gone were the 200% markups Delilah's fake companies had charged. But the personal healing meant more than the money. Sarah Polson, the reporter who had exposed the corruption, was now Marcus's fiancée. Their engagement at the neighborhood festival had drawn cheers from former enemies who now considered them friends. The Grandmother Rose Memorial Scholarship had already awarded its first recipient, a young woman studying automotive technology. Funded by the recovered HOA money that once lined Delilah's pockets, the story had gone national. Congressional testimony, 43 state investigations, millions recovered for homeowners across the country, all because one stubborn mechanic refused to pay extortion. The Kellerman Property Rights Act now protected homeowners nationwide from forced HOA membership scams. Even Marcus's business card had changed: Marcus Kellerman, Auto Repair and Justice Consultation. It would have sounded absurd years ago. Now, FBI agents called him for advice. Attorneys flew in to meet him. Victims from Alaska to Florida shared their stories, many worse than his. Property values told the rest of the story, an 18% increase. Since corruption ended, young families moved in because of the neighborhood's reputation for transparency and fairness. Fear had been replaced by trust. Neighbors had become family. Jake Morrison, now the elected president of the association, held monthly community barbecues that brought together people who once crossed the street to avoid each other. Detective Williams, now head of the county's white-collar crime unit, visited often. Marcus. 12 more property management companies are under investigation because your story gave people courage. Why? Who started something bigger than you know? The physical transformation sealed the emotional healing. Delilah's old parking spot was now a thriving community garden where children learned to grow vegetables alongside elderly residents. The smell of ripening tomatoes in Marcus's grandmother's old soil felt like justice taking root. On quiet evenings, Marcus would stand in that garden and think about the journey, from victim to victor, it had taken. Everything: courage when he was scared, patience when he wanted instant results, evidence when emotions ran high, and allies when isolation felt tempting. But the destination was worth it. A healed community and personal peace he hadn't felt since losing his first wife. Now, the neighborhood celebrated its annual Property Rights Day, teaching children that David could still beat Goliath, and adults that transparency is the best defense against corruption. Wedding planning with Sarah filled Marcus's spare time with joy instead of legal strategy. The same barn where he once sorted evidence of fraud would host their ceremony. Officiated by Mrs. Patterson, attended by 200 neighbors, and so, Marcus ended his latest episode with a message to anyone still fighting their own HOA. Nightmare: document everything, build alliances, don't let bullies convince you justice is impossible. Your courage might save not just your property, but your entire community's future. He grinned at the camera. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA horror story, tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because next week, I've got something wild. A school principal who embezzled $400,000 from student fundraisers and forgot the new PTA treasurer was a forensic accountant. That revenge served colder than Minnesota justice. From his workshop, now a hub of learning, laughter, and genuine community, Marcus Kellerman signed off. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is to fight like hell for the future. Because with patience, precision, and the right tools, everything broken can run smoothly again.